Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our Research Bites talk today with Martine Whitehead. We'll get started in just a few minutes. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our Research Bites talk today with Martine Whitehead. We'll get
Sorry about that. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our inaugural gathering of Research Bites. My name is Marilyn Willis, and I'm the Assistant Director for the Center for the Study of Race, Politics, and Culture. This monthly Research Bites series is one of many programs that we've initiated to engage scholars, students, staff, and community members in interdisciplinary scholarship and programming around the topics of race and ethnicity. Thank you so much to Tiara, our center's program administrator, for suggesting and bringing this series to life. Our goal for this series is to connect staff from across the university with faculty affiliates of the center who study, teach, and write about race and ethnicity. We want to create an informal and interactive space where staff can learn firsthand about some of the exciting research happening on campus and to provide an opportunity for faculty and staff to network with hopes that we will find some shared interests and possibilities for future collaborations. Later in our this episode, you will be able to subscribe to our Research Bites and CSRPC listservs to be notified of future conversations. Today, we are joined by a very special guest, Associate Professor in the Department of Visual Arts and Chicago-based performing artist, Martine Whitehead. She is a faculty member at the Department of Visual Arts and Chicago-based performance artist who dedicates her time thinking about the relationships between marginalized bodies, systems of violence, and modes of perception. In addition to building performances, Martine writes, gathers, creates still and moving images and makes space to liter excuse me for this, space to iterativity, address questions around protocols of theater, dance, and institutional knowledge. Using a transdisciplinary approach, they bring their body and others into contact with those instruments historically weaponized for both containment and liberation, such as architecture, language, and technologies of memory keeping. Please give a warm welcome to Martine.
Hey, everybody, and thank you so much. It's really nice to be here, so thank you for the invitation. And Marilyn, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate you saying associate professor. I am not, but let's just speak that. Let's speak it. So thank you for that, assistant professor in Dova. So I'm going to try to share my screen. And I realized actually when we tested this, we didn't test the sound. So we might get to the point where we have to pause and try to reconnect the sound, but let's see if I can do it. See if I can do it. I'm going to say share sound. Now, oh, if I shared the sound, can you all hear me still? You can still hear me? Okay, great. All right. And now you should just see a black screen. Is that right? Okay, wonderful. Cool. So let's get into it. I was told by Tierra that you all like to see baby pictures, and I couldn't find any baby pictures. But well, there was one I really wanted to find that I couldn't find. So I was just like, no, but let me put in a picture of my parents. So this is my parents. I think that nobody was born yet. I don't think me or my brother was born yet, judging by the hairstyles. Uh, so yeah, it's a very sweet picture. And as I was actually looking for some of these older photos, I was looking at this picture and I was reminded of just a story that my mom had told me that I thought I would share with you all. My parents were married in 1976, so they were really the descendants of the Loving v. Virginia decision, which outlawed from 1967, which outlawed interracial marriage across the country. And they married in 1976. They got married in Pittsburgh, and then pretty straight away they moved to North Carolina, to Durham, North Carolina. My dad grew up in Virginia. He grew up sharecropping in the 50s. So he was, he had some familiarity with the South, but my mom was from St. Louis, Missouri, a nice Midwestern white lady from St. Louis. And she told me once that when they moved, she kind of had a shock at first because they were driving with the car with all the stuff in it, and they passed by this billboard that said, "The Klan welcomes you to North Carolina," which for her was very upsetting, understandably. Um, but they ended up staying in North Carolina, and I went on to have a happy childhood in North Carolina and Virginia. But I was reminded of that story, and it got me to thinking about how it's really important to kind of remember these histories, even histories pre us, and how they influence our research and our work. Um, my mom saw that billboard, and then shortly after she saw that billboard, they moved in, they got settled. She got pregnant with my brother, and she has a story about getting a phone call while she was pregnant. Actually, sorry, she was pregnant with me when this happened. She gave birth to my brother, got pregnant with me, and then got a phone call from the Klan, threatening her and her family if they didn't move out. And they chose to stay. That's where I lived the first 5 years of my life. I think these experiences, though, especially that last one, considering I was still in utero, really, to me, kind of impart the importance of understanding the way that these sort of histories can be passed on to us. These traumatic histories can be passed on to us even before we step foot on Earth. Um, but I'm also reminded of Alexis Pauline Gumbs in her book Undrowned, which draws parallels between Black feminist practice and marine life. And, she talks about how our mothers sang to us in the womb, or dolphin mothers sang to their babies in the womb. And my mother also sang to me. So I process that too. I think one of the most important things we can do for ourselves as researchers, as artists, as a care practice, is to not forget that all of this shows up in our work. What happened to our moms while they carried us shows up in our work, right? So that's my grounding. Um, I'm just going to talk about two projects today. One is it's wrapped up. It's done. We got little tiny bit of it left, but it's wrapped up. And the other one is really in process, very, very much in process. Um, the first project I'll talk about is Force, an opera in 3 acts. Uh, so this piece started, I think, as a zygote in 2019, for me after about 5 years of going in and out of different prisons and jails in Illinois and California to visit folks and teach classes with Prison Neighborhood Arts Education Project, or PNAP. And a much longer time than that, interfacing with the carceral state through family members, various relationships to it. And so I had been, I was kind of at this point regularly going back and forth, especially with PNAP, going to Stateville in Joliet, which is recently closed. And I started thinking about the particular experience of Brown and Black women and femmes in prison waiting rooms, which are these kind of interstitial spaces that are sort of between the prison and not prison, which, as it turns out, that interstitial space, I think, is much more expansive than the waiting room itself. These are spaces with, a really extreme register of affective dynamics, but most of that is happening below the surface, although not always. So I began writing a libretto for an opera about what happens in these places. And having never written anything like that before, I thought I should talk with other women and queers who, like me, have a kind of familiarity with these places. And as I was talking with folks, I would ask them to sort of replay for me their visit in, starting wherever for them the visit actually begins, which is always way before you get onto the prison property. The kind of psychic preparation, the physical preparation, the getting the singles together in the clear plastic baggie, the making sure you have the right bra on, all of this stuff starts way before you even get on the prison property. And I would have these conversations with folks, and then I would sort of try to map out some sort of diagram or floor plan or map of these people's memories. So this image here is a map of Nashua Street Jail in Boston. And these memories that people were sharing with me are, they're memories of repeated traumatic events, and sometimes go as far back as childhood, right? Like going in to visit a parent as a child, now remembered much later. And so the things that pop out are singular. This is a map of San Quentin Prison in California. And the titles for these works, in some cases, are drawn from what my interviewees said. So this person in particular, she did at one point say, "All my dreams are of prisons." She had been going in at the point that we talked, she had been going back and forth every other week for about 4 years, visiting her fiance. And so she had started dreaming about it, about the structure, about the visits, about the inside. So in a way, I was trying to map these blurred lines between dreams and architecture, and the kind of affective atmospheres of the carceral landscape. And as I would talk with people, we would always come back to the ways that those spaces, or the car ride, or the waiting room itself, would function as sites for a kind of insurgent organizing practice, because people are seeing each other over weeks, months, years, and building real relationships and sharing information, sharing strategies with each other, sharing resources. And as I continued working on the opera and I started working with performers, a central movement score that emerged out of these conversations and out of my own experience was called Assembly. This is the dancers performing Assembly at the Graham Foundation here in Chicago. The score, Assembly, it took over a year to develop, and then it kept developing for the 4.5 years that we worked on Force. Its primary elements are that the performers must use each other to get somewhere. They should rest when they need to. They should feel for real the difficulty of what they're doing. So it's hard. It's a very hard score. They should not let anyone go, meaning that even if somebody wants to pop out or wants to hold back, they should do everything they can to not let them go, or they should slow down to wait for them or stop with them, so that everyone's operating at the level of the one who struggles the most. It's very utilitarian. It moves low to the ground. It ends up being that you can like do a bunch of things at once besides the score. Like we ended up using in the final performance the score as a method to also clean up some of the set to prepare for the next scene. So it's very functional. It both demands strength and is also strengthening. It's exhausting, but it's also kind of like a massage. And it's definitely not contact improvisation, although it's high contact and highly improvisational. And then the opera that surrounds Assembly is called Force, an opera in 3 acts. And as I was researching like what even is an opera, it was actually really amazing to find that there's very little hard definition of what opera is, except that it's a big work. It's big work. That's what the word opera means. So Force was sort of a big work about this place, this sort of nothing place where everything is happening. And I wanted the people in it, working in it, and the audience to feel the truth of that place and also to feel the slippages beyond the borders of that place. I had a fantasy that the work would be so big that even if you thought you had nothing in common with prison, that you still, you would still get the earworm of the music in your head. It would sort of force its way into you. I mean that I'm not going to really go into it here, although if we want to talk about it later. I think that kind of fantasy of making something that's like undeniable, making it like undeniable artwork, is doomed to fail. But anyway, that was what I wanted to do. That was the dream. So I also just say to this group too, because maybe you're wondering, I never made an opera before. Why was I making an opera? The way that happened actually was during a visit to Stateville, working with PNAP. I was with Kathy Cohen, who some of you all know, who was teaching at the same time as me, and we were chatting in the waiting room, waiting to be let in. And Kathy always has jokes, and she was cracking jokes about just like whatever was going on that morning in there. And she was saying that there needed to be a telenovela about the waiting room, and I was like, I don't think I can or should make a telenovela, but I feel like I could probably make an opera. And that was how it started. I'm going to play just a little bit of the opera just so you all can get a taste. And please, if this sound doesn't work, somebody come off mute and tell me. Yeah. So that's force. Uh, so shifting now into something very much more in progress. Um, the Black Pit. This is what I'm calling it. It's a working title, Black Pit. But maybe y'all can help me come up with something else. Um, And this, I guess, just as I get older, it seems to be what's happening, which is that I'm like reflecting more on experiences from my childhood and young adulthood. And I'm kind of like trying to reconcile them with who and how I imagine myself to be, or, my current self-fashioning. So I think that's where this is coming from, amongst other things. Um, the Black Pit, for me, the research around this project starts with the ring shout. And I'm so sorry that I don't have the citation for this video. It's actually terrible. So I can't say too much about this video. It's early 20th century. It's a ring shout. I can't say where this is happening or who shot this or who the people are. I'm sorry for that. Um, but just so that we kind of have a picture, I think some of us are familiar maybe with the ring shout, but others aren't. It's an iteration of circular technology, which kind of lays bare the circle as operationalized Black study, a kind of cultivated communal structure forged in the backwoods and hush arbors, just beyond the plantation's gaze. The ring is a physical enclosure of sacred space. The center of the shout, writes Katrina Hazard Donald, was a vortex of spiritual energy and power, which represented a separate and sacred realm, one not of the material realities of enslavement. The ring shout comes to the Americas. It comes with enslaved people to the Americas who had already been practicing a kind of sacred circular movement and sound practice, which was an opportunity to build networks across linguistic regions. And it comes into the Americas, onto the plantation, and people start practicing this, and we actually see how the ring shout is, some would say, I would argue, is one of the earliest forms of American dance, if not the earliest form of American dance. So much comes out of the ring shout in terms of steps, in terms of the use of footwork, in terms of just using this circular technology as a diasporic practice across the Americas. We see it again in the capoeira joda. We see it in the cipher, the b-boy b-girl cipher. So we see this replicate throughout time. And it's instructive to read Hazard Donald's testament to the power of the circle alongside Saidiya Hartman's articulation of critical fabulation, which is a practice of representing the sequence of events in divergent stories and contested point of views to jeopardize the status of the event. I really think about the ring shout as opening a portal in space and time, and actually really jeopardizing the status of plantation space and time. We also see circular communal collective movement practices happen with animals too, which is important for my research into this Black Pit project. Um, you know, when animals do it, they herd, they swarm, they school, they shoal, they flock, but they fill the circles, right? So it's less about pouring a sort of psychic energy into the center of the circle and actually about filling the circles with bodies. And when humans do this, fill this collective circle with bodies, we sometimes call it a mosh pit. And to talk about mosh pits, I want to start with Bad Brains, iconic bands, because first of all, y'all should just know this band if you don't, so you can look up Bad Brains. But also because there is lore that actually Bad Brains are the inventors of the term mosh pit, and I'm gonna hold on to that lore because I believe it. Bad Brains was a all-black hardcore punk band that formed in the late 70s in DC. They eventually moved to New York, but they started in DC. And they started off as they were all from DC. They were kids from DC. They started off as really good, but pretty traditional punk hardcore. it wasn't traditional at that point. Everyone was inventing the form, but what we think of as punk, that's what they were playing. At some point, just before 1980, the whole band converted to Rastafarianism, and they started doing this thing on the records and at their shows where they would play a couple of punk songs, and then they would play a couple of dub reggae songs, and then they would go back to the punk songs. And the thing about Bad Brains is that their shows made space for non-white audience. So punk was definitely a majority white thing, but other kids, especially Black kids, would come to the shows because they were just so excited to have this band. And you end up with this really fascinating thing happening at the shows where you have kids moshing to the punk songs and then going into the dub tracks and having this almost spiritual experience. And HR, the lead singer, when they would do the dub songs, HR would take on this Jamaican affect. He would have this fake Jamaican accent that he would sing in. And the story is that HR, there was kids running around in a circle and they were like jumping up and down and hitting each other and stuff. And they were doing what they do at punk shows. And HR was going into his Jamaican thing and he started saying, "Mash up Babylon, mash it up." And the kids in the pit heard it as mosh pit, mosh pit. And so they started calling it a mosh pit. I'm gonna play just a little bit of Bad Brains just so we can get the vibe.
Sit back or get up or do anything you want to do, but please do it. Because we are here to do it. What's your take up?
Okay. So that's who I'm holding with me as I continue the work on the Black Pit. I think it's also important just to note the thing about that whole band becoming Rastafarians and incorporating that into their music and into their kind of brand, I guess, their style, is that there is actually like a really interesting connection that happens between Jamaican music and dance, and that is really happening because Jamaicans are they're moving to the UK and to the United States, especially in the 60s. There's this thing that's happening where Jamaican music and dance is sort of informing this new music form called punk rock that actually does have a dance that goes with it. Although we don't usually think about moshing as dancing. There's a documentary from 1984 called Another State of Mind that travels around with these California punk bands and talks to people at their shows. And there's a moment in Another State of Mind where they interview somebody describing what a mosh pit is. And I think it's a great example of how, even though we think of moshing usually as just kind of like kids punching each other, there's not only a form to it, but there's also an ethic to it as well. So I'll play some of that interview now.
Some people call it slamming, and some people call it pogoing, and some call it the skang. But I just call it dancing because that's normally what you're doing. Like this one, they just call this more or less a slam. It's just keep going in a circle, keep moving your arms and stuff, and just bouncing off people, pushing them away. Then you'll see people stepping out through the crowd like this, pushing people off them as they bounce into them. And then also, there's also people, you'll see them, they'll be doing the pogo. They're usually pretty close to the stage. And as you keep moving around in a circle like this, because that's the way the pit moves, is in a circle. People are jumping off stage, you push them away, and just try not to get out of that circle, because if you do, you get out of the beat. And that's where the energy's at, is in the beat. Just keeps going like this. Just keep moving around. And it doesn't matter if you fall down or not, because your buddy's going to be there to pick you up, or someone's going to pick you up. Get everything?
So as that person, Brian, says, the rules for the pit are pretty simple. If you see someone down, you lift them up. If you see someone lost, you pull them out. If you see someone swinging, you punch them back in. And beyond that, you just sort of flow. You flow with the circle. That is to say that the space inside the circle pit is not a space for self-composure, self-direction, or self-mastery. It's a space for abdication of ownership over one's singular body, a disavowal of self-governance without a disavowal of collective agency, and an invitation to be shaped by and shape a force that is both unmistakably painful and yet will not let you perish. And I'm especially interested in how this might make room for a black pit as opposed to a more traditional white mosh pit that's just sort of complicated with the introduction of non-white bodies. I'm interested in the mosh pit as a useful tool for thinking about where this shows up in Blackness.
Some people call it
We're
slam.
done with Brian. Sorry about that. The Mobius strip has been really helpful for me. It's a mathematical model of what they call non-orientability. But basically the idea of the Mobius strip is that you've got this two-dimensional surface, two-dimensional plane that you twist and then you connect it to make this never-ending loop. And if you were an ant and you were to walk across the surface, you would end up where you began, but you would be on the other side of where you began. So where your feet are relative to you would still be down, but what is below you would now be above you, right? And for me, it's just like so cool. It's just really cool. But also, I'm thinking about Blackness as a Mobius strip and the strip as a way to think about movement as well, because ultimately what I'm trying to do is make a piece that involves a lot of movement. And so, I kind of need, I need some sort of structure to be able to apply to the movement. Okay, so as I was journeying, going down this research journey, I was going from ring shout to the mosh pit to the Mobius strip, and I got to the point where I was like, well, is there already existing a black pit as I'm thinking about it? Where does that show up already? And this brought me to Montgomery, August 2023, Montgomery, Alabama. Which many of us remember, although some of us never even knew about because of how algorithms work. But we'll talk about it for a bit right now. I love this quote from this comedian on Instagram, and it's a good grounding for thinking about Montgomery in August 2023. She says, "Then we see the most beautiful thing ever. There are black men skipping with no shirt on. Anytime you see a black man skipping, no shirt on, skipping with his jeans and belt and shoes still on, he's not coming to jump rope with you. He's coming to take your soul." So I'm going to play the video. Maybe I'll just go pause for a second to say, before I start playing it, that if you haven't seen the video, there is all kinds of racialized violence. It's a brawl. It's a brawl happening with a whole bunch of people, white and black, brawling. So just to know what the video is, I'm gonna play it, and just for the sake of time, I'm just gonna kind of talk over it. But honestly, you could just watch it and you don't even need to listen to me. This is the Montgomery Boat Dock Brawl as it came to be known, and it starts actually before this moment. The black man who's now getting jumped in the video is the captain of the ship that this is being filmed from. It's a tourist boat called the Harriet 2. You see somebody just threw something at these people. The Harriet 2 mostly has black passengers on it. And mostly black people are around the area. That person swimming in the water, I want to pause it without losing it. just going to pause it so I can just say this. Um, just just to rewind this, how this begins is a very, I mean, him throwing his hat is really significant, but generally how this begins with a Black worker trying to talk to these white people to ask them to move their private boat, and they end up ganging up on him. This is sort of this is the story that we know, right? This is like the meta narrative we are familiar with. Maybe even that Black man running down to help. But I think when things start to shift is here with this young employee of the Harriet II swimming to his aid, and then we start to see other people running down to help the captain. And this is where I think the Mobius strip starts to form. Um, it's also important to understand where this is happening. Montgomery, Alabama, historically was a central point for the slave trade after the abolition of the international trade. So, which was like 1808. I'm forgetting the exact year, but after the abolition of the international trade, it was really often popping in Montgomery. And in fact, where this dock is just not too far from the cotton warehouse that was a cotton warehouse, but also was the main slave market. And this river, and in fact, these steamboats that this tourist boat is modeled on, were how enslaved people were brought down to Montgomery, brought down to the dock, and then marched over to the cotton warehouse. That cotton warehouse now is one of the oh my gosh, TJI. That is so bad that I'm forgetting what TJI stands for. The TJI monuments. Somebody here will remember what TJI stands for. The TJI monument museums, which include the lynching monument that I think a lot of us are aware of, that is those kind of monolith hanging, that series of steel monoliths that hang from the ceiling. That's a monument to lynching across the United States. There's 3 TJI museums that are all about the history of racial terror in the United States. That's all around the neighborhood of this boat dock. There's also the Rosa Parks Museum. There's the Freedom Rides Museum. There's a number of these sites that are located really just beyond this boat dock, but also where they're located and what is just beyond this boat dock is the hood. It's an area that's been divested from by municipally and by the state. And this little dock is a kind of developed area for tourism, but it's really in a it's a dynamic location. Historically, contemporarily, there's a lot happening there in terms of Black struggle. And speaking of Black struggle generally in Alabama, Alabama historically, and Montgomery, Alabama in particular, has been a site of Black union organizing, labor organizing, in fact, not just Black struggle, but labor organizing, which I think is important context for this video because there's a lot of people jumping in, but a lot of these people, pretty much anybody you see with a blue shirt on is a dock worker. So part of what's happening is employees of the dock and of the boat company who are all kind of collectively, we might say spontaneously, although, depending on how we think of that, are jumping into each other's aid. And as this is all happening, I think the way that I see the Mobius strip really coming into play is in a number of ways. One is just the physicality of what's going on, the use of circles, which hopefully you all have been noticing as I've been rambling on. Hopefully you're seeing the circles happen. There's a really amazing one that I think was just somewhere back right here, where we see this guy almost turn himself into a lazy Susan to let the guy on top of him be punched by a circle of people. But we see it happening in the way that people join each other, in the way that people are moving. It's a really, and it tends to be counterclockwise as well, which is interesting in regards to the ring shout and the mosh pit. So we see that happening, but we also, too, there's this sort of flipping the script of what we expected to happen, right? This whole thing starts with these white people ganging up on this Black worker, and to instead have this really changed relationship of not just power, but the relationship of Black people to swimming, or how we might imagine white people to being thrown overboard, because that happens throughout. White people are getting thrown in the river. Um, there's so many dynamics that are being flipped continuously here. Um, and I'll just kind of bring in maybe one other way of thinking about this. If we can think of governance as Stefano Harney and Fred Moten encourage as the management of self-management, we can think about the boat dock landscape as an ecosystem of interlocking institutions, personnel, state-funded as well as historically state-abandoned spaces, which serve to manage individual self-management. And when the captain lifts his arm and does this thing where he throws the cap off of his head, it's almost like a signal of the coming pit, a call to commence the score, which temporarily undoes spatiotemporal hierarchies, um, the way Black staff are meant to behave, um, the way grown men aren't supposed to skip together, all of this kind of stuff. Um, In Venus in Two Acts, Adia Hartman asks, what are the kinds of stories to be told by those who live in such an intimate relationship with death? And so what I've been thinking about and trying to do is choreograph the brawl and build my own Black pit with dancers, really using the brawl as a starting point. There's a lot that I'm trying to work out with the dancers that I've been working with, like what is the role of water and of portals, and what does it mean to think about space and place as kind of alive, spiritually alive, and also temporally structured and activated. Um, I am thinking about consent and choice and force and necessity, which are all questions around risk. And yeah, this is where I'm at. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, so if people have questions, they can drop them in the chat or come off mute and ask. I personally want to know, Martine, like, how did you get started with this type of work? Like, what brought you here? Like,
Do you mean, what type of work do you mean?
so you're the performance-based work that you do, but
Oh,
also
okay.
just like your expertise, your like the things that you like study, like what exactly brought you to do this work? Is it something that stemmed from your childhood? Is it something you experienced in your later years? Like what?
Well, I have been dancing my whole life. I have a childhood friend on this call, Alexis Vaughn, who's known me since at least middle school, who knows for a fact that I was always ready to dance at the park. I mean, we were like, yeah, we've been out there. But yeah, I was always dancing at the parties. Not like going to dance class. I actually didn't take dance class until my 20s. But the kind of like yeah, having this relationship to social dance in particular from a young age, I think I I went to school for painting as an undergrad. So I was painting in college, and at some point, Jefferson Pender, who's an artist based in Chicago, he was my teacher and in undergrad at the University of Maryland. He introduced me to this thing called performance art, which I didn't know about. And as I became more and more interested in performance art and was still having these like party experiences, um, I just became more interested in the kind of like social implications of movement, of being in relation with one another through movement, and how to think about that in the context of all the things that performance art is thinking about. So that was kind of, that was my way into the movement piece of it. But I think if I think about other like antecedents in my practice, definitely painting, even though I don't paint anymore. I think a lot as if I'm painting. I like the way composition works, the way movement works. Um, I think it's like coming out of a painter's mind. Um, and part of why I wanted to start with force is because the the last decade of my life until recently was pretty consistently tethered to prisons and jails. And so I think there's also something that happened for me through that routine going in and out that as somebody who is pretty in my body, I feel the impacts of going into a place like prison. I feel it in my body. Like I feel how it hurts. And I feel how it tastes bad and it smells bad. And like I feel that. And I think that sort of like relate somatic relationship to architecture and space has also been a big part of informing the way that I work now.
Cool, thank you. Go ahead, Leslie.
Sure. Thanks so much for this, and I'm really so thrilled you're at U Chicago now.
Yeah, me too.
I guess I'm curious, and it could be to either piece you described, but I'm curious in the studio when you're working with folks, like obviously you're bringing so much experience, research, accumulated kind of experience and thought into all of this. What does the rehearsal room when you're creating work look like, and what have you found most generative? Like, what's too much to share? Like, you know what I mean? Like to have the kind of terms of collaboration, I guess.
Yeah, that's a great question. That is, I think, totally contingent on the people in the project, and like where it is in its lifespan. So thinking about something like Force, which was a really long term, I mean, it was almost 5 years of working with some of the same people and some people who joined at different stages in the project, and joined in different ways, right? So um, our lighting designer for Force, Tuche Yasek, she came in. I mean, the kind of person she is, she's like a very emotional, spiritual person, and the way that we would talk, we were like talking about everything in the work. We were talking about how it relates to our personal experiences, childhood, the vision that we have for the world that we want. So we were having quite in-depth conversations and then kind of like going off and working and coming back together. Um, there are people, especially the dancers in that project. The dancers were all pretty much there from the beginning. And our rehearsal process, because they were all Chicago based, was very regular, fairly consistent over 4 years. And that meant like those people for me are family. It meant that we were able to work on the work, but also just like our lives. Also, we were going through COVID. So people died. I mean, people had siblings or family members, specifically siblings, a number of siblings of people in the work died during the time we were working on it. And I think all of that came into rehearsal and it came into the process. Also, because so much of what Force was about was not just making it, actually, most of it was not about making the piece, the final piece. Most of it was not about the production. Mostly it was about the process and trying to think about how to sort of make bring as much abolitionist training and study into the actual rehearsal room. And so that meant that we were dealing a lot with consent and with figuring out when to step up and when to step back, when it was okay to take a break, when you could actually go harder, which is all very confusing as a director, like it's my job to push people and make sure they show up on time. But also people had to deal with sick aunties too, right? Or had to be at work. And Chicago's so damn big, you have to take 3 buses to get to the rehearsal, so you're late. Like all of that kind of stuff. And I think trying to really make a space that could hold as much of the wholeness of us, um, and 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 be like fertile grounds for enough vulnerability that people could get to a point where they were able to really deal with consent and saying no. And I think about refusal as also part of consent. Um, all of that was like it was a very deep process. Having said that, there were people who joined that project much later in the project, and I, I had to I had to kind of treat them slightly differently because we didn't have the time and space to get that deep with each other. Not to say, they were obviously fully, I mean, they were fully a part of the project, but I think there was just like a different understanding that for some people it was more like a gig. And I had to sort of treat it with the respect that I would treat a gig, and the kind of protocols, versus for other folks, it was like, I'm doing this for my family until it's done, kind of thing. So, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah,
You
I
have a
know.
question in the chat from
Mhm.
Alice.
Yeah, I saw this. So Alice said, Martine, always great to hear you talk about your work. Would love for you to talk about teaching dance movement at Stateville, what that experience was like, but also what you learned from that about teaching and also what you learned about yourself from that experience. Um, uh, I just was having a conversation with a friend who teaches at the Art Institute, and we were talking about how in these universities and these colleges, the ever shifting move towards the students being clients, that just really alters the dynamic in the classroom, and really throws into relief how teaching inside and specifically at Stateville, it's just in every single way. I shouldn't say that. In many ways, it is very different because the stakes are really different. Um, I think students here, it's a beautiful thing to have a student in the free world in a university or college setting who's really, really there for the knowledge. It's a wonderful thing, and it does happen, and it's beautiful. But there's many students who are there for the knowledge, but also there for like the future career, or how is this gonna like help me on this other thing? Um, and then there's quite a number of students who aren't there for the knowledge at all. And this is why we have an AI problem. Like that's literally why we have an AI problem, because people don't want to do the work. They're not there for the work of it all. They're there for the thing at the end. Um, and that is not the case. That was not the case for me at Stateville. Um, which is not to say that it wasn't, for some people who are incarcerated, education is they're trying to get a degree, or they may be trying to get, they may still want that piece of paper, or whatever the connection is. But there's also just like a desire to be in a space of dialogue and discourse, and just like a kind of a different respect for intellectual rigor and for knowledge. Um, and it changes, yeah, it changes what learning is for me. It changed what I understood learning could be. Um, you know, and I don't think I have worked out. Yeah, there's an architect, there's a French architect named Leopold Lambert who writes about how their architecture can never be a space for liberation. It's just not possible. It's the people inside it that make it a space for liberation. And so I do like I don't want prisons to exist, and I also don't believe that the prison is a site for liberation de facto. Just like it's just there. So if you have a schoolroom in a prison, then that's what's going to happen because people are oppressed, so they want education. I think it requires a whole bunch of other stuff. The people inside, also that you are entering with as an educator, that you're entering with a respect for people as collaborators, as co-learners. But there is something really deep and profound and really frustrating about how how the stakes are different and how it creates actually a absolutely not an ideal educational space, but in terms of the the desire to learn, it's a different kind of space. And it for me, it's like always in my mind to be around that kind of student. That is what I would like. That's my ultimate desire, to be around that kind of student. Um, yeah, I don't know. There's probably a lot more to say about that, Alice, but thank you for that question. Oh, and Alexis said EJI, Equal Justice Initiative. Thank you. I was like, why is my brain? Yeah, Equal Justice Initiative. Thank you.
Any other questions? You can come off mute and ask, or even if it's a comment or anybody
Guess I
else.
have a question, quick. I'm a student. I'm not actually like faculty. And I've been thinking a lot about idea development and kind of like what it means to have like a good idea and sit with ideas and how they grow over time. And I really appreciate you showed us like a work that you said is kind of wrapping up, and then you also have this new project you're working on. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your process in terms of like what ideas you pay attention to that you come up with and how you nurture them over time.
That's great. Thank you for that. What ideas I pay attention to? Probably too many is probably part of the problem. Why everything takes so long. I mean, I'm like sitting here at my desk and I just see this is like a note I wrote to myself that's just sitting right here. I'm like, I think I remember what that was about. Um, yeah, there's a script over there that's never going to be used that I tried out for something that I just need to throw out because it's not going to happen. I think I tend to be pretty I make a lot of mind maps. So let's say that. I tend to have like a bunch of stuff that's happening in one project because I think I do tend to pay attention to a lot of it. Um, and so for me, like I'm a writer person, so I just have, I'm like looking at there's like this is taped to the this is from Asada Shakur's book, and I just blacked out some of it, and then this is something else that I taped on. I tend to just have like a lot of words around that are gonna come around somehow. Um, that's how I am. The editing, for me, the editing has to come later. Um, and I will say that I don't think that that always works well for capitalist time frames. But I do think, and I usually encourage students to like get it, just let it be abundant before you decide what doesn't count or what isn't relevant. Because I think that usually everything is everything, and it usually is all relevant, right? But it's more about later you're going to have to make it into something that is coherent for an audience. But I don't think it necessarily suits the work to do that before the work even exists. And I don't think you can know what the work is until you've got it all out on the page or in the world or the studio or whatever it is.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense and is very helpful to hear.
Oh, good. Cool.
All right, we are at time, and this was a great talk. We're always grateful to have Martine here. As Tracy stated, she's an alum of our Artist in Residence program. So we're happy to have her back, and
We love
thank you all for
APR.
joining today. And this recording will be available on our YouTube if you missed it. But otherwise, thank you, Martine. Have a great day.
Yeah, thank you all so much. This was a treat. Good
Thank
to
you,
see you
Rachel.
folks.
All right, stay warm, guys.
All right.
Bye. Happy holidays.